Nancy Pelosi ascended the platform of the CNN studio under the profound and ultimately fatal misconception that she was poised to dismantle a figure she viewed as a treacherous defector from the Democratic Party, completely oblivious to the reality that she herself was on the precipice of being systematically dismantled by an individual who had observed her specific brand of corruption from a vantage point of intimate proximity for years. The theatrical arrangement was meticulously orchestrated to favor Pelosi, as CNN had marketed the event as a dialogue regarding leadership and accountability, a high-minded conversation concerning the trajectory of the Democratic Party's future, designed to present optics that would portray Pelosi as the dignified elder stateswoman graciously descending to engage with a young, misguided upstart who had forsaken the party fold. She had subjected herself to more than a dozen preparatory interview sessions. She had workshopped her rhetorical talking points with highly paid consultants, and she had even rehearsed her signature dismissive smirk in the mirror, ensuring she had her narrative firmly established and ready for deployment. Her prepared narrative was simple and vicious. Tulsi Gabbard was to be painted as a traitor, an apologist for Vladimir Putin, and a grifter who had turned her back on democratic values in exchange for Republican financial support. However, the one critical variable that Pelosi failed to account for was the fact that Tulsi Gabbard had spent 6 years within the halls of Congress observing her operations with a discerning eye, 6 years of witnessing the internal corruption, the staggering hypocrisy, the rampant insider trading, and the elaborate family enrichment schemes, 6 years of meticulously taking notes and compiling evidence. Unlike the vast majority of Democrats who lived in perpetual fear of Pelosi's legendary capacity to ruin political careers, Tulsi had already departed from the party, meaning she possessed absolutely nothing to lose and absolutely everything to expose. The audience within the studio was evenly divided, with half consisting of establishment Democrats who had arrived to cheer for Pelosi, and the other half comprised of independents and Republicans who had attended to witness whether Tulsi could substantiate her criticisms with verifiable facts. The moderator, Jake Tapper, appeared visibly apprehensive, and in hindsight, he had every reason to be. Pelosi commenced the exchange with a strong offensive, her voice dripping with a rehearsed disdain, as she declared that Tulsi had abandoned her party at a precise moment when democracy itself was under existential assault, asserting that she had turned her back on the values they had fought for, the coalition they had constructed, and frankly, upon basic human decency, accusing her of joining a party characterized by insurrection and falsehoods. "Madam Speaker," Tulsi interrupted, her voice projecting that distinctive, unwavering calm that is forged through military training. "Before we engage in a discourse regarding abstract principles and values, let us first discuss the specifics of your stock portfolio." The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted to a stunned silence, and Pelosi's practiced smirk faltered for the first time. Tulsi opened a dossier, extracted a series of documents, and smiled, not with malice, but with the supreme confidence of an individual who had thoroughly completed her homework, stating that she believed the American people deserved to comprehend exactly how a public servant accumulates a fortune of $120 million on a congressional salary. What transpired subsequently caused every defense contractor, every technology CEO, and every establishment politician residing in Washington to hold their breath in collective anxiety, for this was not going to be a polite exchange. Tulsi arranged her documentation with the exacting precision of a commander briefing a military operation, with every page tabbed and highlighted, ready for tactical deployment. She looked up at Pelosi with an expression that was not quite a smile, but rather resembled the look a prosecutor adopts when they possess the certain knowledge that the defendant is guilty and the evidence is irrefutable. "Madam Speaker, you have served in Congress for 37 years, which is a duration longer than I have been alive, and in that time you have ascended to become one of the wealthiest members of Congress possessing a net worth of approximately $120 million, according to the most recent financial disclosures, all while earning a congressional salary of $193,000 a year. That is an impressive feat of financial management. She paused, allowing the implication to permeate the room, suggesting that perhaps Pelosi should author a book titled How to Become Worth $120 million on a Government Salary, noting that she was certain it would become a bestseller, although she supposed the subtitle would necessitate the addition of the phrase, and how to avoid insider trading charges while doing it. The audience stirred with audible murmurs, and Pelosi's facial expression tightened visibly, yet she maintained her composure, having survived attacks before and believing she could survive this. But Tulsi was merely concluding the setup and proceeded to say, "Let us discuss your husband, Paul Pelosi, a successful investor, indeed very successful, extraordinarily successful, almost suspiciously successful." Tulsi extracted the first specific document, stating that in December of 2020, Pelosi's husband purchased between $1 and $5 million in Tesla call options, which are options to purchase Tesla stock at a predetermined price based on the wager that the stock price would increase. She held the document aloft so that the cameras could capture the evidence, noting that mere weeks later, President Biden, who was newly elected and about to assume office, announced his comprehensive infrastructure plan, which included massive subsidies for electric vehicles, causing Tesla stock to soar and resulting in Pelosi's husband making millions of dollars, offering sarcastic congratulations to him on his impeccable timing. Pelosi attempted to interject, but Tulsi continued relentlessly, pointing out that in March of 2021, her husband purchased over $1 million in technology stocks, including Google, Amazon, and Apple, investing in big tech companies that were facing potential antitrust legislation that Pelosi, as Speaker, possessed the unilateral power to advance or extinguish. Guess what transpired? The legislation died, technology stocks soared, and her husband once again made millions, demonstrating excellent timing yet again. Tulsi produced another document, stating that in June of 2021, Paul bought $10 million in technology stocks, and within weeks, major technology regulation bills that had been progressing through committees suddenly stalled and died, causing tech stocks to rise and the Pelosi family to profit. "Are we perceiving a pattern yet?" she asked as she spread out a timeline and held it up for the audience to view, noting that in July of 2021, Pelosi was questioned regarding the banning of congressional stock trading, and her response was that we are a free market economy, and members should be able to participate in that. "How convenient," Tulsi remarked. "How exceedingly convenient for someone whose family has generated millions from perfectly timed trades." Tulsi's voice hardened as she noted that over a period of 2 years, Pelosi's husband executed more than 50 trades, almost all of which were profitable and almost all of which were timed perfectly to coincide with legislative action, creating a scenario where the probability of such success happening by coincidence is statistically impossible, equivalent to winning the lottery repeatedly. She produced newspaper clippings from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and even left-leaning outlets that had documented these occurrences, noting that Pelosi's defense remained constant, claiming that her husband makes his own investment decisions and that she does not discuss her work with him. "Madam Speaker, you expect the American public to believe that you and your husband of 60 years do not discuss your work, that he simply happens to place million-dollar bets immediately prior to your taking legislative action. That is not a marriage. That is a criminal conspiracy operating under the guise of a marriage license." The audience erupted, split between applause and outrage, while Tapper attempted to restore order, and Pelosi's face transitioned from confidence to genuine anger. Her jaw set tight. "Representative Gabbard," Pelosi stated with an icy voice, "my husband's investments are entirely separate from my duties as Speaker. He is a private investor who operates independently. Tulsi cut her off immediately, reminding her that Martha Stewart went to prison for significantly less, specifically for making $45,000 on an insider trade, whereas the Pelosi family has made millions, Madam Speaker, yet somehow you remain above the law. The woman who was incarcerated for lying about a $45,000 trade was barred from hosting a television show, yet you are permitted to serve as Speaker of the House while your family generates millions on trades that align perfectly with your legislative agenda. Tulsi leaned forward, reminding Pelosi that when she was in Congress, when she was still a Democrat and still in Pelosi's caucus, she co-sponsored legislation to ban members of Congress from trading individual stocks and asking who opposed it. You did, Tulsi asserted. You killed it in committee. You ensured it never received a vote. And the reason is because you are generating too much wealth from the corruption, because banning congressional stock trading would cost your family millions. So you protected your income stream while simultaneously lecturing everyone else about ethics. She held up one final document in this segment, a letter from the Campaign Legal Center calling for an investigation into Pelosi's stock trades, documenting pattern after pattern of suspicious timing and referring to it as apparent conflicts of interest, which represents lawyer speak for the fact that this resembles insider trading even if it cannot yet be proven. But we all know what it is. Everyone watching knows what it is. You have utilized your position as Speaker to enrich your family, which is not public service. It is organized crime wielding a gavel. Pelosi attempted to pivot back to Tulsi's alleged betrayal of the Democratic Party, but Tulsi refused to let her off the hook, demanding an answer to the question of how her husband knew to buy Tesla options right before EV subsidies, how he knew to buy tech stocks right before she killed tech regulation, stating that either he is the luckiest investor in American history or she is sharing insider information, asking which it is. Silence filled the room as Pelosi's mouth opened and closed before she finally claimed this was a distraction from the real issues. Corruption is the real issue, Tulsi replied quietly, asserting that the American people deserve better than leaders who accumulate wealth from their positions, that they deserve better than her, and that was merely the first round, with Tulsi having 7 more fully loaded. During the commercial break, Pelosi's staff swarmed her, visible in a huddle, gesturing frantically, and scrolling through phones in a desperate attempt to find talking points, while Tulsi sat calmly reviewing her notes and taking an occasional sip of water, looking like a soldier preparing for the next phase of a military operation, because that is precisely what this was. When the broadcast returned, Tapper tried to steer the conversation towards safer ground by suggesting they discuss the events of January 6th and the subsequent investigation. Perfect, Tulsi interrupted. Let us talk about January 6th because, Madam Speaker, you discuss it constantly, calling it an insurrection and the worst attack on democracy since the Civil War, asserting it was terrorism and a planned attempt to overthrow the government. She paused and looked directly at Pelosi, stating that as a combat veteran who served in Iraq, she has witnessed actual insurrections and actual attempts to overthrow governments, and that January 6th was a riot, a terrible and violent riot, but insisted they discuss Pelosi's role that day and why it was allowed to transpire. Pelosi's eyes narrowed as she claimed she had no role, but Tulsi interrupted flatly, stating that she was Speaker of the House, and the Speaker possesses authority over the Capitol Police, controls their budget, approves major security decisions, and oversees Capitol security, noting that this is not an opinion, but a fact, and the literal job description. She extracted a timeline to walk through the events, noting that in the weeks preceding January 6th, there were warnings, intelligence warnings, and social media chatter regarding potential violence, with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security issuing warnings, meaning everyone knew something might happen. Tulsi held up a document containing testimony from Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund, noting that he testified under oath that he requested National Guard support multiple times in the days before January 6th, stating he was denied, stating that the House Sergeant-at-Arms, who reports to Pelosi, rejected his requests, and stating he could not get approval for the resources he required. She pulled out another document, a memo demonstrating that President Trump offered 10,000 National Guard troops for January 6th, a fact confirmed by the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, with Trump's acting Secretary of Defense testifying to this under oath, emphasizing that 10,000 troops were offered days before January 6th. Who rejected that offer? Tulsi asked, answering that it was Pelosi's office, the Speaker's office, that said no. The audience fell silent, as this was not public knowledge to many who thought Trump had refused to deploy the Guard, not that Pelosi had refused to accept them. On January 6th, when the breach commenced, Chief Sund called begging for National Guard support, and the timeline indicates it took hours to secure approval, hours during which Capitol Police were being overwhelmed and people were breaking into the building, leading Tulsi to ask where Pelosi was and what she was doing during those hours. Tulsi's voice hardened as she noted that after January 6th, Pelosi created the January 6th committee, handpicked every member, rejected the members that Republican leadership wanted, and controlled every aspect of the investigation. Yet, the committee never investigated Pelosi's security failures, her role, or her decisions. She held up a report from the Inspector General on January 6th security failures, documenting failure at the leadership level and stating someone should be held accountable for the intelligence failures, resource failures, and response failures. Yet Pelosi was never called to testify or ask the hard questions because she controlled the investigation. Tulsi produced one more document, a letter from congressional Republicans asking Pelosi to preserve all communications from January 6th, specifically requesting emails, text messages, and phone records, and revealed that those communications disappeared, deleted and destroyed, with Pelosi telling investigators she no longer possessed them. She looked at Pelosi with undisguised contempt, stating that she had the authority to prevent January 6th, was warned, was offered resources, and rejected them, and then when the attack happened, an attack she could have prevented, she utilized it for political theater, spending 2 years investigating everyone except the person responsible for security, herself. Pelosi's face flushed red as she attempted to argue that the security of the Capitol is not her sole responsibility. But Tulsi interrupted, reiterating that she controlled the budget and the resources, approved or rejected major security decisions, was offered 10,000 troops and refused, and that Chief Sund begged for help and she denied him. Then, when people died, police officers were injured, and the Capitol was breached, Pelosi blamed everyone except herself. Tulsi stood up, her military bearing evident, stating she has commanded troops and been responsible for their safety, asserting that when something goes wrong on your watch, you do not blame everyone else, you take responsibility. But Pelosi has never taken responsibility for anything, having failed to protect the Capitol and then covering it up by controlling the investigation to ensure she faced no difficult questions, declaring that this is not leadership, Madam Speaker, it is cowardice. 2 rounds, 2 devastations, and the situation was only going to worsen for Pelosi. Tulsi could perceive that Pelosi was rattled, her confidence replaced by defensive anger, which was good because angry people make mistakes, and Tulsi was far from finished. "Let us talk about 2020, Tulsi said, her tone conversational now and almost friendly, which somehow made it more menacing, referring to the COVID lockdowns, the small businesses destroyed, the people unable to work, and the children unable to attend school, noting that the rules did not apply to everyone. She pulled out security camera footage and queued it up on the screens, showing August 31st, 2020, in San Francisco, at a salon called E-Salon, pointing out who was getting her hair done indoors without a mask. The footage played, showing Nancy Pelosi clear as day walking through a salon that was supposed to be closed, getting her hair washed and styled with no mask in sight, despite the fact that her city, the city she represents, had banned indoor salons completely, leaving salons closed, hairstylists out of work, and people losing their businesses. Yet somehow, she received special treatment. Tulsi let the footage play, noting that the salon owner, Erica Kius, released this security camera footage not because she was political, but because she was outraged at having been forced to close her business while her employees were out of work, and she was losing everything, only to see Nancy Pelosi, who supported the lockdowns, getting her hair done in private. The footage ended, and Tulsi reminded Pelosi of what happened next, that she held a press conference not to apologize or acknowledge her hypocrisy, but to claim she had been set up, demanding an apology from the salon owner, the very woman whose business she helped destroy. With lockdowns she did not follow. She pulled out news articles showing that Erica Kius received thousands of death threats, threatening her family and business, all because she exposed Pelosi's hypocrisy, forcing her to close her salon and leave San Francisco, eventually leaving California entirely because she could not be safe there. Tulsi's voice shook with genuine anger as she accused Pelosi of destroying that woman's life, causing her to lose her business and home and flee the state, while Pelosi never apologized once, blaming the owner for her own rule-breaking and allowing her supporters to terrorize her, all before going right back on television to call for stricter lockdowns. She pulled out more documentation, contrasting this with Pelosi's net worth of $120 million, her mansion in San Francisco, her winery in Napa Valley, and her home in Washington, D.C., noting that Pelosi did not suffer during lockdowns, but got her hair done and attended fancy dinners, while working people lost everything. Tulsi held up a list showing that 47% of small businesses in San Francisco closed during COVID, gone forever, with restaurants, shops, salons, and gyms shuttered, and thousands of jobs lost and lives destroyed, all while Pelosi supported every lockdown and mandate while breaking the rules herself. She looked at the camera, declaring that this is who Nancy Pelosi is, representing rules for thee, but not for me. Someone who will destroy your business with lockdowns she does not follow, ruin your life if you expose her hypocrisy, demand you apologize for her rule-breaking, and lecture you about sacrifice while getting her hair done in a closed salon despite being worth millions. Pelosi tried to respond that the incident was blown out of proportion, but Tulsi countered quietly that a woman lost her business because of her, that thousands of small business owners lost everything because of policies she supported but did not follow, reiterating the disparity between Pelosi's wealth and the suffering of working people. Tulsi leaned back, stating that this is what Pelosi does, using her power to enrich herself and crush anyone who gets in her way, noting that Erica Kius learned that the hard way, and wondering how many others are too afraid to speak up because they have seen what she does to her critics. The commercial break was tense, with Pelosi's team in full crisis mode, having underestimated Tulsi's preparation and willingness to engage. And as they scrambled, Tulsi reviewed her next section, knowing this one would hurt, as it implicated not just Pelosi, but the entire Democratic establishment, the intelligence community, and the media. When they returned from the break, Tapper looked like he would rather be anywhere else, as Tulsi initiated a discussion on the 2020 election, specifically regarding October 2020, when the New York Post published a story about Hunter Biden's laptop containing emails showing potential corruption and business dealings with foreign governments. It was a major story from a major newspaper. And then something remarkable happened, Tulsi noted, as she pulled out a timeline. Within hours, the story was labeled Russian disinformation, not by intelligence agencies or investigators, but by politicians, specifically by Pelosi. Tulsi held up clips of Pelosi's media appearances on CNN and MSNBC, where she stated the laptop story was Russian disinformation and a Russian intelligence operation, telling people not to pay attention to it. She set down the clips and noted that 51 former intelligence officials then signed a letter saying the laptop story had all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation, a letter released through a Democratic operative and immediately used by the Biden campaign to dismiss the story, while social media companies censored the story based on that letter. Tulsi pulled out documentation showing Twitter locked the New York Post's account for 2 weeks. Facebook throttled the story, and YouTube removed videos about it, effectively killing and censoring the story based on a claim of Russian disinformation. She looked at Pelosi and stated there was just one problem. The laptop was real. The FBI had possessed it since December 2019, knew it was real, knew the emails were authentic, and had told Congress, the intelligence committees, the Gang of Eight, and Pelosi herself. The room was silent as this explosive point landed. "You knew the laptop was real," Tulsi said quietly. "The FBI had briefed you. You had access to classified intelligence. You knew it wasn't Russian disinformation, but you went on television anyway and lied, calling it Russian disinformation, and helping to censor a true story from a major newspaper 3 weeks before an election." She pulled out post-election analysis showing that 17% of Biden voters said they would not have voted for him if they had known about the laptop, a number sufficient to swing the election in several key states. Tulsi's voice hardened as she accused Pelosi of interfering in an election, coordinating with the intelligence community and social media companies to censor true information that could have changed the outcome, declaring that this is not protecting democracy, but undermining it through election interference. Pelosi shook her head, claiming they had intelligence assessments, but Tulsi interrupted, stating the FBI had authenticated it, and the Russian disinformation letter was signed by officials who had no access to the laptop or intelligence, calling it a political hit job that Pelosi was part of. She held up the letter, noting it was coordinated with the Biden campaign and that the signatories later admitted they had no evidence it was Russian disinformation, but signed it because it was politically useful. Tulsi looked at the camera and asked the audience to imagine if Republicans had done this, if Trump had used intelligence officials to call a true story, Russian disinformation 3 weeks before an election, and social media companies had censored the New York Times, noting Pelosi would have called it fascism and the end of democracy. "But when you do it, it is fine," Tulsi said, turning back to Pelosi, noting the staggering hypocrisy of censoring true information to help a candidate win while claiming to protect democracy. Tulsi set down her documents, concluding that Pelosi helped censor a true story, lied about it being Russian disinformation, used her position to interfere in an election, and then spent 4 years lecturing everyone else about protecting democracy and fighting misinformation, declaring that Pelosi is the misinformation and the threat to democracy she claims to be fighting against. Pelosi was barely maintaining composure as her staff gestured for her to leave, but she was trapped. Tulsi showed no mercy, pivoting to discuss Pelosi's family, specifically her son, Paul Pelosi Jr., pulling out a folder marked Pelosi Family Business Interests and noting his interesting, lucrative, and connected career, serving on boards of energy, tech, and biotech companies, despite having no particular expertise in those fields other than being her son. Tulsi pulled out corporate records, starting with Viscoil Group, a Ukraine-based energy company. Paul Jr. joined the board of while Pelosi was Speaker, noting the lack of energy or Ukraine experience and the parallel to Hunter Biden. She pulled out more documents showing Paul Jr. also worked with Chinese companies, was involved with a firm having significant business in China, while Pelosi controlled trade policy, traveled with her on official congressional trips to Asia, met with foreign officials, and leveraged her position to make business connections. She held up photos of Paul Jr., In China, with Pelosi on an official delegation and meeting Chinese business leaders, noting that in 2020, during the pandemic, he was involved with a company that received PPP loans while his mother controlled COVID relief legislation. She spread out a pattern analysis showing her son made millions from foreign companies with business before Congress, served on boards while she controlled policy, and leveraged her position, calling it corruption plain and simple. Tulsi looked directly at Pelosi, reminding her that she spent 4 years investigating Trump's family for conflicts of interest, while her own family was doing the exact same thing, asking where the investigation into the Pelosi family is. Pelosi tried to defend herself, saying her son is a private businessman, but Tulsi shot back that so were Trump's kids and Hunter Biden, yet only her family gets a pass, pointing out that her son's only qualification is being her son. Tulsi pulled out financial records showing the family's net worth growing exponentially through stock trading, her son's dealings, and her husband's investments, accusing her of turning public service into a family enrichment scheme and highlighting the obscene double standard compared to the scrutiny placed on Trump's family. Tulsi looked at the camera, stating, "Nancy Pelosi has spent 37 years enriching her family through her congressional position via every possible avenue of corruption, while having the audacity to lecture others about ethics. 5 rounds of destruction." But Tulsi wasn't done yet. Her expression changed to one of personal intensity as a combat veteran about to confront a war profiteer. "Madam Speaker, I am a combat veteran. I have served in Iraq and been deployed to war zones, so let us talk about your enthusiasm for military interventions and your defense stock portfolio." She pulled out voting records, showing Pelosi voted for virtually every military intervention, including the Iraq War, Libya, and Syria, and consistently voted for increasing military budgets, calling her the definition of a war hawk. "And here is why," she said, pulling out financial records showing the Pelosi family portfolio is heavily invested in defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing, companies that make billions when America goes to war. Tulsi spread out a timeline showing the pattern. In 2011, the family buys defense stocks. Then Pelosi supports intervention in Libya, and defense stocks soar. In 2013, they buy more. She pushes for Syria, and stocks soar again. She pulled out recent data on the Ukraine war, showing the family buying defense stocks just before the 2022 invasion, and Pelosi becoming the loudest voice for sending billions in military aid, noting every bomb sent makes her family richer. Tulsi's voice shook as she accused Pelosi of supporting war not out of principle, but because it is profitable, holding up documentation, showing Pelosi opposed withdrawing from Afghanistan because peace causes defense stocks to drop. Tulsi stood straight, her voice commanding, stating she has seen young Americans come home in flag-draped coffins and met with Gold Star families, knowing the cost of war while Pelosi profits from it. She pointed at Pelosi, noting she has never served or seen combat, but is eager to send other people's children to die in wars that make her family rich, calling it war profiteering rather than patriotism. Tulsi pulled out a letter from Veterans for Peace, calling for an investigation into Pelosi's defense investments due to the conflict of interest, calling it blood money. She looked at Pelosi with undisguised contempt, stating she is not a public servant, but a war profiteer in a designer suit. Pelosi tried to respond that she supports a strong national defense, but Tulsi interrupted, distinguishing between defending America and invading countries to boost contractor profits, emphasizing that she wore the uniform while Pelosi just profited. Tulsi's voice dropped as she accused Pelosi of turning American foreign policy into a profit center and monetizing war, while calling herself a patriot, shaking her head, and declaring her a war profiteer who needs to answer to every veteran. Pelosi looked like she had been in actual combat, her physical reaction betraying her tension, but Tulsi proceeded to discuss her legacy as Speaker over 6 years. She pulled out legislative records showing little achievement in her first term, and a second term consumed by 2 failed impeachments of President Trump. Tulsi broke down the numbers. The first impeachment over Ukraine failed with acquittal, and the second, over January 6th, failed with acquittal. Noting Pelosi spent 60% of her time on these efforts while neglecting other issues like the border crisis, immigration reform, and infrastructure. Tulsi pulled out news clippings showing Pelosi said nothing is off the table regarding investigating Trump on her first day back, accusing her of deciding to impeach before having evidence driven by revenge rather than oversight. She held up poll numbers showing the impeachments were divisive and unpopular, yet Pelosi proceeded to damage Trump politically. Tulsi reminded Pelosi that she herself opposed the first impeachment while still a Democrat, because she knew it was a political vendetta, pointing out she was right as the Senate acquitted him. She pulled out voting records showing Pelosi refused to negotiate with Trump on infrastructure or immigration to deny him a win, putting her vendetta above responsibility to the American people. Tulsi stood, declaring Pelosi's legacy is one of failure, failed impeachments, and self-enrichment. A warning about letting someone stay in power too long. One final round remained to end it with a statement that would reverberate. "Madam Speaker, how old are you?" Tulsi asked. "You are 84 years old," Tulsi stated, noting she was first elected 37 years ago when Reagan was president and the Berlin Wall stood, letting the duration of her accumulating power and wealth sink in. Tulsi pulled out district data for San Francisco, showing homelessness, drugs, and crime worse than ever, the cost of living the highest in the nation, and the middle class priced out, arguing the district declined while Pelosi prospered, becoming worth $120 million. She pulled out data on the Democratic Party, accusing Pelosi of creating a gerontocracy where octogenarians like Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn refused to retire, blocking younger members. She pulled out recent videos of Pelosi stumbling over words and appearing confused, stating she is diminished and not as sharp, yet running for re-election at 84 because she is addicted to the power and cannot imagine life without it. Tulsi stood and walked closer, asserting Pelosi represents everything wrong with Washington as a career politician who has never held a real job but became wealthy through insider trading and corruption. She pulled out full documentation, accusing her of profiting from war, covering up scandals, protecting her family, and crushing challenges. Tulsi walked back to her position and told Pelosi it is time to go, to retire and let someone else fix what she has broken, gesturing that the Democratic Party, young Democrats, veterans, small business owners, and workers all deserve better than her corruption and hypocrisy. She told her to go home to her mansion and enjoy her millions, pulling out a letter signed by 300 former staffers calling for term limits and age limits, showing even her own party is tired of her. Tulsi sat down the letter and looked at Pelosi one last time, stating the cruelest part is staying in power past her expiration date because of an addiction to power that the country is paying for. She stood straight, declaring history will remember Pelosi not as a trailblazer, but as a corrupt politician who stayed too long and enriched herself while constituents suffered, a cautionary tale. Tulsi looked at the camera, saying it is time for a new generation and an end to corruption, then looked back at Pelosi, asking if she will retire or hold on until the end. Pelosi tried to respond, but her words were jumbled and confused, her cognitive decline evident and painful to watch, until she trailed off, unable to finish. Tulsi stood there, stating quietly that Pelosi cannot even defend herself coherently anymore, which is the cruelest part, and reiterating that the country deserves better and it is time to go. The video went viral within minutes, garnering over 100 million views in 24 hours, with "Time to Retire Nancy" trending worldwide. CNN's fact-checkers verified Tulsi's claims and even MSNBC hosts looked uncomfortable trying to defend Pelosi. The progressive wing piled on, and Pelosi's approval rating in her district dropped 15 points, with 62% saying she should not run again. A primary challenger announced a campaign. Ethics complaints were filed, and the SEC announced a review of congressional trading. Pelosi's power collapsed as members stopped listening to her and speaking engagements dried up. Her book on leadership was canceled. 2 weeks later, Pelosi announced she would not seek re-election, a decision she claimed was hers, but everyone knew was forced by Tulsi's destruction of her career. She left the press conference looking diminished, her power gone. 6 months later, DOJ investigations were ongoing, and her district elected a progressive running on ethics reform. Tulsi Gabbard did not gloat, but felt vindicated, having exposed the corruption she had watched for years. The debate became required viewing in political science classes as a lesson in accountability. Tulsi Gabbard had exposed the corrupt heart of the Democratic establishment using facts and evidence, laying bare the insider trading, security failures, hypocrisy, and war profiteering, ending Nancy Pelosi's career with the truth, and signaling that the age of accountability had arrived.